This video is the second half of a two-part series that I started last week, so if you haven't seen part 1 yet, click over to go watch it. If you have already watched part 1, or are just too lazy to watch it yourself, here are some highlights to get you caught back up.
Last time on
this tier list video. Every major developer of the 16-bit era tried to make their own characters to rival Sonic. The Tood scale, the power of rock, paper, scissors, 90s as heck. Zool, no relation to the Ghostbusters villain. Poots, Mr. Nuts, boy. This game runs at like 10 frames per second, covering the final 12 characters next week. So yeah, I actually followed through on making part 2. Since this is the second half, I'm not going to re-explain my grading criteria, but they will be on screen if you need a refresher. This video will be covering 12 more 16-bit era mascots and adding them to my previously existing tier list. This time, we're left with some of the weirder mascots of the era that were probably too cursed to survive. Anyway, it's now time to continue the 16-bit mascot tier list. Let's start out with something pretty weird. Alfred Chicken. While naming a chicken Alfred is bizarre enough as it is, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Alfred's design is about as basic as you can get for a cartoon chicken, but it is still appealing. His innocent look has an amusing contrast to his quest, which is apparently to take down an army of mecha chickens. Alfred's abilities are also pretty simplistic, with his primary ones being to peck at the ground and a dive bomb used for combat and for movement. Alfred doesn't have the same type of Tood as is present in many of the other characters, but the game does feature quite a few Looney Tunes style explosions, which gives it an appeal that I would say is similar. Alfred Chicken doesn't really do anything noteworthy, but his character is pretty inoffensive, so I'm throwing him into C tier. If you thought Alfred Chicken was weird, he has nothing on the next character, Bonk. Bonk was originally created to be the mascot for the TurboGrafx 16, but eventually he made his way onto the SNES for Super Bonk, which is the version I'll be looking at. Bonk's design, while simple, is pretty recognizable because of his huge head, happy expression, and moderate similarity to Krillin from Dragon Ball. In his games, Bonk's primary ability is to dive into the ground headfirst to bonk his enemies. If you've never seen Bonk before, you may be asking yourself, how is this weird in any way? But that comes to play with the different power-ups he comes across. These come in the form of meat or candy, my two primary food groups. Eating meat turns Bonk into a Super Saiyan that can turn enemies into stone, or whatever this monstrosity is. The red candy shrinks Bonk down and gives him the power of Rage, while the yellow one turns him back to normal. Bonk's last power-up is the blue candy, which makes Bonk big and gives each form a unique ability, like laying eggs or turning invisible. I really have no idea what to give Bonk on the Tood meter. I think his Tood is on a different plane of existence, somewhere up here. Bonk is a very unique character with some insane abilities, so I think he earns a spot in the A tier. Taking a break from the bizarre for a minute, next up on the list is Artie Lightfoot. Artie is some kind of anthropomorphic animal who wears overalls and a winged hat. He has a very friendly design, kind of reminiscent of some early Disney characters. By himself, Artie's main ability is using his tail as a pogo stick, but he can also pull up a mirror that magically makes him immune to attacks. However, the real star of the show, in my opinion, is Artie's pet/sidekick, Peck. Peck is a penguin-looking thing that follows Artie around and can swallow enemies whole, but with a couple power-ups, he can also inflate like a balloon or break stone walls. On the Tood scale, as Artie is fairly expressionless, he would be near the bottom, but simply by having Peck there, I'd say that raises it to about the middle. I think I just really like Peck. He's pretty cool. The two of them together earn their place in the A tier as well. One mascot character I found whose origins surprised me was Pulseman. When I first saw this game, I legitimately thought it was a Mega Man spin-off, but then I saw the game's developer, Game Freak. Yes, 2 years before Pokemon Red and Green came out, those same developers made a 2D platformer for the Genesis. Many years later, Pulseman's design would serve as an inspiration for the 4th gen Pokemon Rotom. Anyway, Pulseman is a half-human, half-AI who really does just kinda look like a Mega Man boss. However, his abilities are where Pulseman really shines. All of his moves, aside from this sick bicycle kick, have to do with the buildup of static electricity. By running or dashing, Pulseman builds up a charge that he can use to either shoot a beam of electricity or use the Voltecker ability, which lets him bounce off walls like a pinball. Pulseman also has a solid amount of Tood. His design incorporates a good amount of spikes and edges, plus he just radiates a totally cool energy. Well, I mean, he's literally radiating electrons, but you know what I mean. For perfectly capturing the vibe I was looking for on this list, I'm putting Pulseman in S tier. One game I'd heard of but never played before making this video was Boogerman. On the surface, Boogerman just looks like an endless series of toilet jokes. Oh wait, that's because it is. However, there's some good stuff hidden underneath all the mucus. Boogerman himself is fairly basic looking, just a human with some exaggerated features, but the animations are what really give him his appeal. This game has quite possibly the smoothest animations I've ever seen on the Super Nintendo. This applies to Boogerman's general movement, but also to his abilities. These include burping, farting, and flicking boogers, because of course they do. Eventually, Boogerman can even fly around using the propulsion of his farts. All the crass jokes do certainly give Boogerman a unique tood, coming from the same corner of the 90s that spawned Nickelodeon slime. While Boogerman does have quite a few positives, the juvenile humor just falls flat for me a lot of the time, so I'm gonna put Boogerman in B tier. Next up is Spanky from Spanky's Quest. Spanky is a pretty normal looking monkey who has the power to summon various types of balls. I don't really have anything more to say here. I'm just gonna slide him into C tier and move right along. Okay, you all know the next one on the list. I teased him in my last video, so here to fulfill the prophecy is the bobcat himself, Bubsy. Bubsy is another mascot who is very obvious and is trying to copy Sonic. He's a brightly colored animal that runs fast, but they just took the opposite of blue for his color and flipped to a random page in an encyclopedia for his species. However, Bubsy does wear a t-shirt, so at least he's a little unique. When it comes to abilities, Bubsy's pretty bare bones. He can run and jump and has a small glide while in the air. These aren't terrible, but where Bubsy really gets points off here is that he has a negative ability, fall damage. In almost any other 2D platformer, it's kind of expected that your character is protected from fall damage, like they're wearing the long fall boots from Portal or something. However, if Bubsy hits the ground too hard, he just shatters into pieces. Another downside to Bubsy lies with his tood. He just uses voice clips to communicate to the player, but most of them are just so dang annoying that I really wish they weren't there.
That's it, I'm out of here.
So yeah, Bubsy really is as bad as people say. He's going down to D. Back on the weird train, we have Chuck Rock. I really don't know what it was about cavemen in 90s games. Maybe it had something to do with their association with dinosaurs, but there's a strangely high number of games with them as protagonists, and Chuck Rock is one of the weirder ones. First of all, look at him. Chuck Rock is like Fred Flintstone from the darkest timeline. Why anyone would want to play as this guy is beyond me. Chuck's main abilities are kicking and thrusting his gut into enemies. Maybe he trained with Jelly Boy at some point, who knows. On Tood, Chuck Rock is fairly low, but not at the bottom. His walk has some character to it, and his hit animation, although terrifying, is memorable. Overall, I think Chuck Rock deserves to go into C tier. Sparkster from the Rocket Knight series is probably one of the more well-known characters to go on this list, and for good reason. His design is fairly close to something like Sonic, but he has quite a bit to differentiate himself, including a suit of armor, spiky blonde hair, and a jetpack. And the jetpack isn't just for show, as Sparkster uses it in multiple moves to jet across the screen at crazy speeds. In addition to the jetpack, Sparkster also has a sword that can shoot beams, which is really fun to use. Sparkster's tood is really high up there, because in addition to the cool, determined look that he has through most of the game, he takes a moment to chill out while he's hanging upside down, which also highlights his possum origins. Sparkster the Rocket Knight is a very solid character that fits well with the time while also having his own identity, and that's going to earn him a spot in S tier. Next up on the list is James Pond. Pond is a secret agent fish, and an obvious reference to James Bond, who stars in a trilogy of platformers filled to the brim with movie puns. In the third game, Operation Starfish, which is the one I'll be referencing, Pond doesn't really look that much like a fish, but more of a, frog maybe? Whatever he is, James Pond's abilities mostly come from the gadgets found throughout the levels. These include anything from bombs to jetpacks to fruit guns, and whenever Pond is out of gadgets, he can also punch enemies in both directions. Pond doesn't have a significant amount of tood, but small amounts shine through every once in a while. James Pond is kind of middle of the road compared to these characters, so he will go into B tier. So, I suffer from asthma from time to time, so when I saw there was a game that supposedly teaches children how to use an inhaler, I was mildly intrigued, but also cautious, because educational games don't exactly have a good track record. The game in question is Bonk the Bronchiosaurus. Bronky is a really basic looking green dinosaur, without a whole lot to make him unique. His abilities are attacking with what the manual calls a foil, although it looks more like a Q-tip to me, and shooting breath for distant enemies. He also has the ability to take his inhaler to cure damage caused by smog and other pollutants. Bronky, like a lot of edutainment characters, is pretty lacking in the dude department, just kind of being an empty husk for the player to control. Since Bronky the Bronchiosaurus doesn't really have any redeeming qualities, he goes down into D tier. Last up for the tier list, but by no means any less bizarre than any of the other weirdos here, is Rocky Rodent. Just one look at this guy and I'm uncomfortable. The combination of his lanky body, bulging yellow eyes, and long tongue is just really something. Rocky's main form of attack is his hair, which can change in both its style and combat capabilities. The spiked hair, for instance, allows Rocky to stick into ceilings for traversal, while braids allow him to swing on hooks or whip enemies. Rocky is also pretty good on Tood. He has a lot of slapstick comedy in his animations, similar to something like Wile E. Coyote. Rocky Rodent is really quite a good platformer character, but his complete creepiness factor is keeping him from the top of the list, so instead he'll be going in A tier. So that was 12 more characters on the Mascot tier list, putting the total up to 24 total characters from the 16-bit era of gaming. Going through these was pretty fun, and I learned a lot about different retro games. If I had to choose any one of these characters to get some sort of remake or remaster, I'd have to go with Dynamite Headdy, because that game just hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. For now, this is the end of this tier list, though if I were to find 12 more characters, maybe I'd make a part 3. No matter whether I do that or not, the next video I make will be going into more detail about one of the games I mentioned in the previous part. Until then, thanks for watching this video. Subscribe to my channel if you liked it so you can see my other works in the future. Again, thanks for watching my 16-bit Mascot tier list.